people can change them. We've seen this happen before. Throughout history, practices considered normal or unavoidable have been challenged and transformed. The same is true for animals. Every win we've achieved has happened because people were willing to question the status quo and push for something better. At SAFE, we know our mission is ambitious. We're working to transform deeply embedded systems and create a future where animals are treated as sentient beings, not commodities. That's a challenge. But we do know that change is possible because we've already seen it happen. Public attitudes are shifting, awareness is growing, and more New Zealanders than ever are questioning the way animals are being treated. Today, I want to explore not only the challenges animals face, but also the systems that are enabling them and the opportunities we have to change them. Because a better future for animals isn't something we have to imagine, it's something we can actually build. So at SAFE, advocating for farmed animals makes up a significant part of our core work. They represent the vast majority of animals impacted by human activity. And the system they're part of, I'm going to be saying that word a lot in this presentation. The system they're part of means that harm is widespread and ongoing. The issues I'm going to be speaking about today aren't isolated incidents. It's just not one or two bad farms or one regulation that's not very good. The suffering many animals endure in New Zealand is systemic. It's ingrained into everyday practices, permitted in New Zealand and perpetuated in large part due to our broken animal welfare system. More than 160 land animals are farmed in New Zealand annually, and the majority are kept in intensive indoor factory farms. I'm sure we all know what factory farming is, but in case anyone is new and wanting to learn, factory farming is a highly intensive method of animal agriculture designed to maximise production by confining large numbers of animals in a confined space. At its core, factory farming treats animals not as individuals with their own needs or experiences, but as units of production. Every aspect of their lives is managed around efficiency and output. Where they live, what they eat, how much space they have, how quickly they grow, and when they give birth, and ultimately when they're killed. Across New Zealand, animals are confined in cages, indoor barns, feedlots, where opportunities to move freely are completely denied or heavily restricted. Selective breeding is used to grow animals that grow faster, produce more, have more babies. Many animals undergo painful mutilations, such as beak trimming, tail docking, and teeth clipping, to manage stress and aggression from intensive confinement. Factory farming isn't simply a collection of poor practices. Animal suffering is built into the model itself. These systems are designed to maximise efficiency and profit at the expense of the animals kept within them. Every year in New Zealand, at least 128 million animals are factory farmed, and the animals I'm going to be discussing next make up the majority of that number. So, the lives of chickens bred for meat are among the shortest and most intensive of any farmed animal. They're bred to grow bigger and faster than nature ever intended. Their bodies simply cannot keep up. Many struggle to walk under the weight of their own bodies. Most spend their entire lives inside large sheds, sometimes with up to 40,000 other birds. As they grow bigger, their quality of life declines. There's less room to explore, and the birds become increasingly immobile because even moving becomes painful. For some, reaching food and water is impossible. Over time, the floor beneath them gradually becomes covered in a mixture of bedding, urine, and feces. The birds spend their lives standing, sitting, and resting on this litter, which can cause painful burns, sores, and infections. All the while, the ammonia from the waste affects the air that they have to breathe. For these chickens, factory farming doesn't just determine where they live. It shapes how their bodies grow, how they experience the world, and how much suffering they endure during their short lives. Sorry about that video, guys. Next, we're going to look at hens farmed for egg production. So through selective breeding, commercially farmed hens today can lay around 300 eggs a year, far more than their wild ancestors ever would. Laying almost every day takes an enormous toll on their bodies. Many suffer from brittle bones, osteoporosis, and reproductive problems because they're producing far beyond what nature has ever intended. In New Zealand, hundreds of thousands of hens are confined in colony cages, while millions more spend their lives inside indoor barns. And they, of course, never step foot outside. In New Zealand, caged hens endure one of the most prolonged and intensive forms of factory farming. They typically are killed at about 18 months of age, so the majority of their lives are spent living like this. Up to 80 hens can be crammed into one cage, and the regulations allow birds to be given space about the size of an A4 sheet of paper to live in. They can't even move freely, let alone do many of the things that come naturally to them. Barn systems give hens more room than cages, but they're still a form of factory farming. These hens spend their entire lives in sheds housing thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of other birds. Imagine trying to recognise your neighbours, or form a pecking order, or just find somewhere quiet to rest, living in a crowd that large. For many hens, barns are extremely stressful living conditions, characterised by constant noise, competition, limited opportunities to escape or find space. It is a life far removed from the outdoor environments and stable social groups these animals have evolved to thrive in. There's another reality of egg farming lots of people don't know too much about, and that is male chicks. So they can't lay eggs, and that means they're of no use to the egg industry. We don't have the exact number, but at least 2 million newly hatched male chicks are killed every year here in New Zealand, and they are killed by a process called maceration, which is a giant blender that they're dropped into while fully conscious. For these chicks, life begins and ends on the production line. Female chicks also undergo a painful mutilation known as beak trimming. So what that means is the tips of their sensitive beaks are removed. And why that's done is to reduce or attempt to prevent feather pecking and even cannibalism, which is something that can occur in highly intensive factory farming environments. Before moving on to the next slide, I just wanted to talk about something that's very relevant right now. Currently, MPI and NAWAC are consulting changes to the Lay Hens Cove welfare. I don't know if anyone here has heard about that, but what they're doing, or proposing I should say, is to increase the number of hens inside barn systems from 7 hens per square metre to 9. Has anyone here met a chicken before? Yes? They're pretty big, you know. Imagine 9 of them in a square metre. Revisions to our animal welfare site, we have a really informative webpage and an action form that you can click on. Our campaign manager, Emma Brody, helped make that, as well as our campaign coordinator, Charlie. So I really would love it. Everyone here spoke up for hens and said, no, please don't do that. New Zealanders care about animals and want them to be treated with dignity and compassion. As public expectations continue to grow, so too does the opportunity to create a future where no animals are subjected to the harms of factory farming. Change is possible, but to get here, we must first understand what enables it. These systems don't exist by accident. They're sustained by a range of social, commercial, political, institutional barriers. There's a long list, but I only have a limited amount of time today. So I'll focus on 2 issues: the gap between public perceptions and the realities of factory farming, and how New Zealand's animal welfare system is failing farmed animals. Understanding and addressing these barriers will help us form the pathway to a better future for animals. So first, I would like to start with the fact that the truth is hidden from society. We can't challenge what we can't see. If New Zealanders don't know how animals are being treated, how can they be expected to oppose it? The factory farming model relies on keeping the public disconnected from the animals living within it. The less people know, the easier it is for these systems to continue operating without challenge. I want to emphasise that this isn't a case that New Zealanders don't care, because they do. It's that they're being prevented from seeing what they're being asked to accept. Every year, though, an expose gives New Zealanders a rare glimpse inside factory farms. Time and again, the public response is not acceptance or indifference, but concern, outrage, and calls for change. Yet the outcome is often the same. Mistreatment is exposed, public attention grows, demands for reform follow, and then the momentum fades. This raises a very important question. If New Zealanders want stronger protections for animals, why does meaningful progress so often fail to follow? Well, the answer lies not only with the industries involved, but also with the institutions responsible for overseeing them. Because even when the public demands change, those charged with regulating and enforcing animal welfare standards ultimately determine whether that change becomes reality. This brings us to our next hurdle. One of the biggest barriers to ending factory farming is our broken animal welfare system. An effective animal welfare system should drive continuous improvements for animal protections and phase out harmful practices. Instead, we're seeing a regulatory system that appears to protect industries rather than the animals within them. We continue to see a troubling pattern of decisions and actions and regulations that reinforce the status quo, and on occasion, decisions that make things worse for animals. So, let's look at some of the contributing factors. We have significant concerns about how our animal welfare system is being governed right now. The Ministry for Primary Industries, or MPI, is responsible for regulating farm animal welfare in New Zealand, including developing policy, ensuring compliance, and enforcing the animal welfare legislation. At the same time, it is also responsible for growing the primary sector and increasing agricultural productivity. Those two responsibilities don't always point in the same direction. On one hand, MPI is expected to protect animals. On the other, it's expected to support the industries that use those animals. We believe this is an inherent conflict of interest, and we're seeing that in play right now. Earlier I mentioned MPI's proposal to further intensify indoor factory farms. This proposal isn't about improving animal welfare, it's about increasing industry productivity. Our concerns don't stop there. MPI's approach to enforcement is largely reactive, with only 43 investigators overseeing industries that farm over 160 million land animals every year. The regulator depends heavily on members of the public to report welfare concerns rather than proactively looking for them. Good regulators know what's happening before problems become crises. It means collecting data, identifying trends, monitoring compliance, and working to prevent harm, not simply responding after the fact. Earlier you might have seen a stat that said more than 128 million animals are factory farmed annually in New Zealand. We say more than because we don't actually know the true number, and neither does MPI. So if you think about that for a moment, the regulator responsible for protecting farmed animals doesn't know how many animals it's responsible for overseeing or the conditions they're being kept in. If a regulator doesn't know the scale of the industry it's regulating, how can it identify risks, detect systemic animal welfare failures, target urgent reform, or know where to focus enforcement efforts? This is more than a data gap. It's a fundamental regulatory failure that has real consequences for millions of animals. Now, I know everyone here went to Marcelo's session, so I'm going to keep this one very short. At its heart, animal welfare legislation should exist for one reason: to protect animals from suffering and ill treatment. It should prevent harm, drive improvements, and ensure animals are at the centre of every decision made about their lives and well-being. Too often, though, we are seeing the opposite. Instead of a clear path towards better protections, the law is being used to entrench practices that cause harm to animals in our farming sector. Time and again, practices most would consider unacceptable are allowed to continue because our legislation makes exceptions for them. When the laws designed to protect animals end up permitting the systems that harm them, it's a clear sign that our animal welfare legislation is failing to achieve its purpose, and something needs to change. Political priorities have a significant influence over the welfare outcomes of animals in New Zealand. A key challenge is that improving the lives of animals is really treated as a long-term political priority. New Zealand has no dedicated strategy setting out where we need to go or how we will get there. Instead, animal welfare is often addressed issue by issue, without a coordinated plan for achieving meaningful systemic improvements. And without that long-term direction, progress can depend too heavily on the priorities of whoever happens to be in power. A new government can mean new priorities, different decisions, and a very different future for animals. That's the fundamental problem, of course. The protections animals receive should not depend on the outcome of an election. We can see the consequences of this approach in some of the decisions being made today. Take the minister responsible for animal welfare, for example. Before entering Parliament, he served as president of Federated Farmers, one of the country's leading agricultural lobby groups. During his tenure, he has campaigned to reinstate full-life animal export by sea, opened the rodeo finals where animals were tormented for entertainment, and of course, championed legislation that prevents the ban of farrowing crates from coming into effect. I think many of us will agree that these actions don't align with those of someone who's supposed to represent the interests of animals. But ultimately, this isn't about one minister. Ministers come and go. The deeper issue is that our animal welfare system should not depend on who happens to hold portfolios or which party is in government. If we want lasting improvement for animals, we need a system where decisions are guided by independent science, robust welfare evidence, and a long-term vision that genuinely considers animals' interests, where their needs and experiences are at the centre of political decision-making. Of course, rather than what we have now, where they're being weighed against short-term political or economic priorities. That's how we move beyond short-term politics and create protections that actually endure, protections that recognise animals as sentient beings whose lives matter and whose welfare deserves to be protected in its own right. Now, I know we've already talked about the next slide a little bit, but an example of how all of these systemic issues have come together is the government's recent decision to prevent the ban on farrowing crates from taking effect. So in 2020, SAFE and New Zealand Animal Law Association challenged the use of farrowing crates and won. They were supposed to have been banned in December of last year, but weeks before the deadline, the minister responsible for animal welfare, with the help of MPI, announced an amendment bill that sought to allow the use of these cruel systems indefinitely. The regulations closely mirrored those put forward by the pork industry, and the government's own Animal Welfare Advisory Committee was ignored, and almost 90% of public submissions on the proposal of the bill were in opposition, but it was soon after voted into law by the coalition government. This decision was incredibly disappointing and demonstrated just how broken our animal welfare system really is. But if anything, it only strengthens our determination to fix a system that continues to fail animals and to build a new one that genuinely prioritises animals and the values of New Zealanders. I'll go next. Yeah. Today's presentation has highlighted some difficult realities that can feel overwhelming, but they also show us where change is needed. and where our efforts have the greatest impact. Our task now is to ensure that desire for change is translated into action, accountability, and better outcomes for animals. So that's why SAFE's work goes beyond just responding to individual cases of animal suffering. We're working to change the system that creates the suffering in the first place. Moving forward, we're going to be campaigning for stronger animal welfare laws that prohibit factory farming, accountable governance that puts animals first, and a compassionate, resilient food system that moves beyond intensive animal agriculture. We know this isn't something any one organisation can do, and that's why everyone in this room is here, because we need all of you to achieve this. So we can all make a difference for animals in our day-to-day lives, whether that's choosing more plant-based foods, supporting SAFE's work, making a submission, attending a summit, or simply starting a conversation with someone in your life about animals. Those actions all matter, because every one of those actions adds up to something bigger. Together they build public support, political momentum, and collective power that we need to create to create change. None of us can do this alone, but with our individual actions, they all come together and they become a movement. And it is that movement, all of us together, standing together and refusing to accept a system that fails animals, that will get us where we need to go. So thank you for being here, thank you for caring, and most importantly, thank you for standing alongside others who believe animals deserve better.
I was just curious about the next step for the farrowing crates. Where do we go from here to ensure that we can get rid of them? And obviously they had time to reduce, and was there a reduction because they only overturned it 3 days before it was meant to come into force? So were there farmers that already changed their actions before that leading up to it? And numbers?
Not that we know of. I think there were a few failures in the lead up to the ban on farrowing crates. We saw the government not actively pushing or promoting it, like we did when battery cages were banned. So the industry was given 10 years to phase those out of use, and every year the egg industry was asked to provide a report showing the numbers going down. We're not aware of that happening at all with farrowing crates, which is very unfortunate. But at the end of the day, our government, EPI, was supposed to have seen that through, and they didn't. We're very concerned with free-range egg farming. You'll find that even though they've got the same label on the packaging, you can have two free-range farms next door to one another. One can have 500 hens on it with heaps of land. Then you've got another that's got flocks of 20,000 birds. You may have seen in the news a few years ago a bird flu outbreak occurred on a mainland poultry free-range farm where about 200,000 animals were killed to contain the disease. Now, I think when people think about free range, we think green grass, red barn, happy chicken, but the fact of the matter is that all of the issues we discussed about the egg industry, including being killed at 18 months of age, male chicks being culled, beak trimming, reproductive problems from their breeding standards, still all apply to free-range birds. They do get access to the outdoors, which is different from barn and cage, but their lives are still measured by what they can produce, and then they're still disposed of when they're 1.5 years old.
How are they slaughtered? Are they gassed or do they go to slaughterhouse?
Well, we know that when bird flu outbreaks occur, the plan is to kill them with CO2 poisoning, which is a terrible way to die. Very stressful, very painful. But on commercial farms, there's a few different ways that they're killed. We've spoken with someone who worked at a colony farm. If anyone's interested, you'll be able to find an interview with him where he talks a little bit more detail than I will right now. But they're either killed by manual neck breaking, where they're pulled out of the cage. Sometimes it doesn't work. If you listen to that interview, you'll hear his first-hand accounts that often it doesn't. The other way is they're put in a truck and sent to a slaughterhouse.
I've been on the place, it's bloody terrible.
Yeah.
I've been there filmed it.